Hi, grade nines. A lot of you had trouble with this ticket here, this check-in ticket. It was talking about the cost per person. Here we can see that it says cost per person is what we're looking for. So one of the things is that you have to interpret, first of all, that the cost per person means the rate of change. So we're talking about cost being the dependent variable over here. You can see total cost, and the number of people is the independent variable. So the cost per person, the cost for each person, is what we would describe as the rate of change of this relation. So that's what we're trying to find. Once you realize that the rate of change is what we're looking for, I'm going to show you how to find the rate of change both from a table of values as we have over here and from a graph as we have here. So starting with the table of values, the rate of change is the change in the dependent variable for every 1 unit of change in the independent variable. I'm going to say that again just so that it sinks in for you. The rate of change, or growth rate, is the change in the dependent variable, in this case cost, for a 1 unit change in the independent variable, in this case number of people. So let's, in order to look for the change, we can't use the values that already exist in the table. We can't, for example, just take this 275 and divide by 10 and get 27.50 per person. That would only be true if there's no fixed fee or initial value, which we don't know at this point whether there is one or isn't one. So you can't do that. What you want to look at is the change in the variables. So if we look at the dependent variable, each time we go down a row in the table, the independent variable is increasing by, turns out to be $175. And we can check from here to here as well, just to make sure it is in fact linear, and that also increases by $175. That's not $175 for each person. That is, if we look over here, $175 for 10 people. So this side is going up by 10 each time. So if we want to look at the growth rate, or the cost per person, then the cost per person would be the cost increase as we go from row to row, $175, divided by the number of people, which is 10 people. And if we divide 175 by 10, we get 1750. So it's 1750 per person. Okay, so that is our cost per person from the table of values. Now, if we wanted to, we didn't ask you in this question for the initial value, but if we wanted to find the initial value, if we know that it's 1750 per person, and then if we look at our first row of our table over here, and we see that 10 people cost $275, well, if we subtract off $175 for those 10 people, in other words, go back in the table, we'd see that the base cost, or the initial fee, is $100. So we're starting off at $100, and then we're going up by 175 more for each 10 people added. Doesn't ask that, but if you were asked to find the initial value, that's what you would do. Let's now take a look at our graph. I'm just going to zoom in on this a little bit. So for our graph, we want to see again what is the cost per person. And if you try and go across just one square, so if you were to see, start off at 0 and go across one square and see how much this goes up, it's really hard to read that from the graph because the numbers are really small. So better to take a bigger section of the graph to get a more accurate answer. Some people used a very small part of the graph and ended up with $12.50 per person. I'm going to use a much bigger part of the graph here. So let's say I'm going to go from this data point here, which is right on $250, and then I'll connect it up to this part right here, which is at $100. So if I now take a look at this section of graph here, so I'm looking at this whole section of the line, it increases by $250, sorry, by $150, goes from 100 to 250, which is an increase of $150 for 10 people. So if I was to write that in, here I could say I've got $150. That's how much it increases from there to there. And for that $150, I get 10 people. So we get $150 for the people, plus we've got this starting point here of $100 down here. That's our initial value. So if I want to find the cost per person, it's obvious what the initial value is, $100. The cost per person now is going to be cost per person is going to be $150 per 10 people, and that equals $15 per person. So that is the cost per person for the graph. Let's just review what the question was. So the question said, which hall's total cost includes a lower cost per person? So we're not interested in the total cost. We're not interested in which one has the higher starting value or anything like that. We're just interested in which one has the lowest cost per person. So to answer that question, so we want to make sure that we're answering the question that we were actually asked, we would say then that hall B, is it hall B? Yeah, hall B. So we'd say hall B has the lowest cost per person. Alright, we might as well put in how much? $15 per person. So come back to this video often and review it because it's a good example of finding the rate of change. In this case, it would be the cost per person. The rate of change from a table of values by looking at the changes in the dependent and independent variables and dividing them, or the rate of change from the graph by looking at the rise over run. Sometimes we call that the slope of the graph, or rise over run from the graph.